climate change is not an environmental issue that happens to affect poor people. It's actually a poverty issue. So when smallholder farmers loses a crop, they can lose their whole productivity asset base, and
Mhm.
then the consequences is that they pull their children from school, they take on debt, and they fall back on years on any development path. So without climate smart agriculture, insurance and organized value chains, the gains we make against poverty can be erased in one single season.
Welcome to the Beyond Poverty podcast. Welcome to the Beyond Poverty podcast, hosted by Outreach International. I'm Eline Kluter, I'm CEO of Outreach International and an anthropologist trained in international development and social systems. In each episode here at Beyond Poverty, we bring together practitioners, researchers, and community leaders to explore with us the challenges that keep people in a state of chronic poverty, and then how community-led development is helping communities solve these challenges with solutions that are lasting. In this episode, we'll be discussing food security, particularly in remote and low-income regions, which are often the places that are most food insecure, meaning that the challenges that put pressure on the food supply can have the most immediate and severe effect on the people who live there and depend on these systems every single day. We'll talk about the causes of these challenges, including economic instability, environmental pressure, and then, of course, also climate change. We'll also talk about the important work being done to truly understand and overcome these challenges through academic and theoretical research, and then turning that into actionable solutions that have real-world impact. To talk about this today with us, there's no one more qualified than my guest, Professor Jan Willem Swanepoel. Jan is an associate professor in the Department of Sustainable Food Systems and director of the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, Rural Development and Extension at the University of the Free State in South Africa. As director of the center, Jan provides strategic, academic, and operational leadership for one of the country's foremost engaged scholarship hubs in agriculture. His focus area include agricultural extension, sustainable agriculture, livestock value chain economics, food security, and smallholder development. And under his leadership, the center manages over 100 master students, and then on top of that, 20 to 30 PhD candidates on an annual basis. And through that, they produce applied research that directly informs agricultural policies and practice across Southern and also Sub-Sahara Africa. Jan holds a PhD in sustainable agriculture, a Master's of Business Administration with distinctions in financial and managerial accounting, financial management, project management, and new venture creation. He also holds a Master of Science in Agriculture, focusing on animal breeding, and then a postgraduate diploma in financial planning. With such a vast and impressive resume, Jan, it is a real privilege for me to welcome you here today with us. And I'll add that I also know you as a friend, Jan, because you are a fellow South African of mine. You are also a fellow COFSI. And for those who do not know what a COFSI is, that is the short that we use for all of us alumni from the University of the Free State. And then Jan, you and I were also in the same high school together. And so we come from small rural areas within South Africa and areas that we call home. So, with all that, it is just such an amazing honor, and also with so much gratitude that I welcome you to be here with us. It's a small world, eh, Jan?
Yes, it really is. Thank you, Eileen. It's really wonderful to be on your podcast today. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, it is just such a thrill for me. Okay, so I do want us to get into our conversation because we have a lot of wonderful things to discuss. But before we do that, share with us a little bit more about your background, Jan. What is it that brought you to this particular place, this particular time, and this career that you are currently in?
Yeah, as you just said, I grew up on a sheep farm in the Rural district. That's a very small rural town in the southern Free State of South Africa. So Free State is one of the provinces, and there we farmed with Duny Merino sheep and alfalfa. And agriculture was not just a subject I chose, it chose me. And the farm taught me that land is patient, that communities depend on one another, and that nothing happens in isolation. For me, this work has always carried something of a calling, a sense of service and stewardship that I hold quite personally.
Mm-hmm.
So after my studies at the University of the Free State and a period in the private sector, I returned to academia in 2016 because I wanted to live agriculture experience into something that could reach more people. And today, through the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, Rural Development and Extension, my work sits at the intersection of where academic rigor and real communities, smallholder farmers, your communal livestock keepers, wool value chains, and agri-entrepreneurs across South Africa comes together. As project coordinator for TagDev2, I help to transform how African universities connect with agriculture and the communities around them. My deepest conviction, the one that drives everything, is that research and development must be done with communities and not on them.
Mm-hmm.
So, poverty is a knowledge deficit, it's a systems deficit, and change happens when you walk alongside people and not when you hand down solutions.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so well said, Jan, that poverty is not a knowledge deficit, right? It is a situation of a systems deficit. And that is where true change can really happen in a transformative way in changing toward the greater good. We're going to unpack that a little bit more, but there are two things that you shared just now that for our audience, let's just pause quickly at that. You mentioned Duny Merinos. What is that?
So, a Duny Merino is a South African dual-purpose wool and meat sheep breed, and it's actually recognized for its adaptability. So, it does well in many vast biomes in South Africa, from communal grazing areas to your commercial farms. So, it's a very nice breed of sheep in South Africa.
Mm-hmm. And very resilient, like a high, and also hybrid then, eh?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And then there's another thing that you mentioned, and that's TagDev 2.0. What's that?
Okay, so TagDev2, it stands for Transforming African Agriculture Universities to Meaningfully Contribute to Africa's Growth and Development. So that is a partnership program that's led by RUForum. RUForum is the Regional Universities Forum for Capacity Building in Agriculture, and their head office is in Uganda. And the program aims to strengthen African universities as a catalyst for inclusive agriculture transformation by enhancing teaching, research, innovation, entrepreneurship, as well as community engagement. So TagDev2 focuses on developing skilled graduates, creating employment opportunities for young people, and supporting vulnerable and disadvantaged students, and also to promote sustainable food systems and rural development across Africa through university, community, private sector partnerships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful collaboration and also partnership. And I remember from previous conversations, Jan, the Mastercard Foundation is also involved in that collaboration.
That's right. The Mastercard Foundation is the funding institution, so they fund the whole program. It's a 10-year program and stretching over the whole Africa.
Yeah, so regional wide with this very intensive focus on agriculture and then food systems too, right?
That's right, yes.
Yeah. I'm certain through all of that work, Jan, and including, of course, the work with TagDev too, it's unavoidable for you all to do your work without being cognizant of the impact of climate change. Recent figures around that shows that 22% is the estimated drop in agricultural yields by 2050 attributed to climate change. And that's not something that we should take lightly. That is a lot of food that is estimated to drop off the market and basically drop off of people's plates from a food insecurity perspective. So let's talk a little bit about that, Jan. How in your research and then also in your work have you seen the impact of climate change manifest itself, particularly when it comes to food insecurity?
So we are definitely living in an age of compounding crisis. Climate change never arrives alone. It comes with geopolitical instability, rising input costs, erratic rainfall, land degradation, and financial exclusion all at once. And it is the most vulnerable smallholders, communal livestock keepers, rural women, and they have to absorb all these greater shocks with fewest buffers. So it's definitely a big issue in Africa and all over the world. So globally, climate change is reconfiguring where food can be grown, when rains come, and how much water is available. Why? Interlinked supply chains. Since COVID-19 and the Ukraine war, the effect on grain and fertilizer, it exposed the fragility of just-in-time food systems. Africa is the continent most exposed to climate risk, yet least responsible for it. And most of its people depend on agriculture, and the majority of smallholders on rain-fed, marginal land. And we already see that erratic rains, prolonged droughts, and its southward creep of the desert conditions, that's happening already, And in my own research region, which is the communal areas of the Free State and the Eastern Cape, farmers tells us that rains are later, shorter, and less predictable than in a generation ago. So the grass is changing, water points dry earlier, animals lose conditions faster, and many conditions change over the landscapes. So South Africa carries a particular paradox. So in a middle income country in which food insecurity persists at a troubling scale, with a well-capitalized commercial sector alongside a large communal as well as a smallholder sector that is undercapitalized, underinsured, and excluded from the formal value chains. So climate shocks hit the second group the hardest.
Yeah.
And inequality and vulnerability that itself is a form of injustice. So even in the recent foot and mouth outbreak in South Africa reflect this climate livestock livelihood nexus.
Yeah. I do want to come back to this paradox, which is South Africa, because I do think we see it also in other middle income countries, right? And South Africa is very unique in its status as a middle income country. Just quickly, you mentioned just-in-time food systems. Jan, what is that?
So a just-in-time system is a supply chain approach in which products are produced and delivered exactly when needed, with minimal inventory or reserve stock held along the value chain. So the goal is to reduce costs associated with storage, warehousing, spoilage and inventory management, and tied up capital. So a simple example maybe is, imagine a supermarket normally sells 100 loaves of bread a day. So traditionally, they will keep 500 loaves in storage. So when deliveries are delayed, there's still enough stock for several days, where just-in-time systems, they receive approximately 100 loaves each day with little excess stock that is kept. So if the delivery truck is delayed, shelves maybe come empty within hours. So a just-in-time food system just means that farmers harvest when processors need the products, and processors produce when retailers need the products. Retailers stock only what consumers are expected to buy, and very little food is held in reserve. So food moves continuously through the supply chain rather than just sitting in storage. I think there's a few advantages. So that is mostly the lower storage costs, the less food wastage and spoilage, and a better cash flow. And I think there's also a bit of better efficiency. So the products are also fresher. But the disadvantages might be that there is little backup stock, and the system can be very vulnerable when the disruptions happen, such as droughts or floods or transport strikes, fuel shortages, and pandemics, border closures, conflict, and all of those things.
Yeah.
So when one link in the value chain fails, shortages can occur very quickly.
Yeah. And then, of course, Jan, I can imagine to bring that chain back into its former state doesn't happen overnight. So one chain gets disrupted and the whole system is not only delayed, but it takes a really long time to get back on track. And so if you think about this type of food system, when you then add additional shocks onto it, it can have really, really detrimental impact on food security wherever this type of food system is in play. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
You brought up the example of South Africa as a paradox when it comes to food supply, when it comes to food production, because it's a middle income country. Do you know of other examples of such countries that are experiencing the same kind of very paradoxical situation as South Africa?
Yes, definitely. Our neighboring countries like Zimbabwe, Namibia is a very drought-stricken country, and even further upwards in Africa, you really also get that same type of paradox that happens throughout especially Southern Africa and south of the equator.
Yeah, yeah. Let's go back to climate change, right? So we were talking about climate change and how things are drastically shifting. You were mentioning in the areas where you do your research where the desert is creeping, right?
Yeah.
Desertification is happening at an alarming rate. Unpredictability is a great factor for farmers as an unknown. They don't know when to plant and how to plan accordingly. What does all of that mean with regard to poverty? Because not all people are impacted the same.
Yes, no, definitely. And climate change is not an environmental issue that happens to affect poor people. It's actually a poverty issue. So when smallholder farmers loses a crop, they can lose their whole productivity asset base, and then the consequences is that they pull their children from school, they take on debt, and they fall back on years on any development path. So without climate smart agriculture, insurance and organized value chains, the gains we make against poverty can be erased in one single season. And you often get consequent seasons that might be drought-stricken or even flood-stricken.
So from this conversation, it's very clear, Jan, that our food systems are under considerable stress. And that might be an ongoing thing, and it's further, compounded by climate change and other factors too. But I know that you and colleagues in the field, you are doing really, really good work to mitigate the risks associated with, for example, factors like climate change on the food sector. And you are also working very well and very hard to work across regions and across borders. And that is what's so important with the work you do with DACDEV, across border collaboration and across generations of collaboration. So let's talk a little bit about that. What is going really well at the moment? What is research showing us that there are openings for change? And then at the same time, where can we still strengthen our practices so that we become more resilient and so that we become more sustainable?
So globally, the conversation has definitely shifted from charity to development and from handouts to systems. And organizations like yourselves at Outreach International embody that shift through community-led, locally owned capacity building. And there's a real recognition that women are the backbone of smallholder agriculture. Digital tools are opening new entry points for previously invisible farmers, and the SDGs give us a shared language and accountability frame. So I believe we should do research with communities and not on them. So a great example of this is a model that was developed for our rural communal livestock farmers, and it makes so much sense for the work we do in the communal areas. And that's the 4H principle or cycle that we work with. So the 4H principle starts with hope, and that's where we work with farmers who genuinely want to change. And the willingness is the precondition for everything else. So you create hope with them. And then herd is the second H, and that's where communities come together around a shared goal, a shared vision. And then you get your skilled herders where they apply planned grazing every day. And after those things are in place, you get harvest. And that's where you see the first visible rewards, whether it's a higher income, better animals, higher yields. That's where harvest comes in. And when harvest happens is when healing takes place. So heal is the fourth H, and that's the legacy, where you start to see rangelands recovering, soil is rebuilding, and water is returning. And you can just imagine the cycle that goes back to hope. When the healing happens, there's more hope, there's more communities coming together, and that's how that cycle moves the community out of poverty and out of that poverty trap.
And that for me, Jan, is such a beautiful example of development that is circular. You start with the hope. From there, you bring communities together. The second H, the herding, right? Bringing people together. And if you have to have the hope, you have to have the herding happening before you can even think about doing the actual practice, in this case, of, livestock raising. And so when you've done that, then you can start to see the healing and you reflect on that healing. And then you start back with hope again, And
Right.
In our sector for community development, we talk a lot about that circularity of sustainable change. Stated differently, if change is sustainable, you will always find a circular movement, right? And it's such a beautiful example. There's a herding example, right? So starting with the herding, then move to the harvest, then focus on the healing, and then you start again with the hope at the start. Yeah. Jan, who developed this framework?
The framework was developed by Dr. Jacques van Rooyen. He's a very good friend of mine, and he owns an organization called Reherd Africa. And they are working in many Southern African countries with great successes in our communal areas with our livestock farmers, especially with the livestock-wildlife interaction. And that's where you see the real change and benefits of this program.
Yeah. And there are so many spaces, Jan, across Southern and Sub-Sahara Africa where you have also that livestock and live, wild animals who need to share a space together. And I can just imagine how much work towards sustainably having those ecosystems work together is done by your colleagues.
Yes, that's definitely right. And I think there's great rewards coming from that.
So the herding example is a fantastic example to show how scholars and researchers and practitioners are working towards strengthening livestock farming across the region where your research is focused. Is any other example coming to mind for you?
Another example that I can think of is our maize processing project. So we are working with, sorry.
And just quickly to interrupt you there, Jan, maize is what we in Southern Africa refer to as corn, just
Corn,
for our audience.
that's right, yes.
Yes.
So it's a staple food. It's a crop that we grow here in South Africa, and it's grown in the Americas as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are working with great partners such as Grain South Africa, which is a commodity organization for grains in South Africa. And then also our government departments like the Department for Science, Technology and Innovation, and also the Technology Innovation Agency. And in this program, we take our primary producers, which are our maize farmers, and we teach them how to process their own grains through a process that we call nixtamalization. And that's a traditional technique that we use to produce many maize-based products that is very nutrient-rich and delicious. So they learn to run it as a business, to become entrepreneurs, and to meet health and safety standards, to sell and to employ others. In other words, we help to build a value chain where there was none and keep more of the value within the community.
Yeah. And so this process, what I really like about this process in this example that you are sharing, Jan, is number one, it's a traditional technique. So it's drawing on, existing knowledge within communities and building that out. And a second thing that makes this a very powerful example is how farmers are not only producing, but they are processing. And so they can take so much more of the profit for themselves as they build out a whole chain, a value chain for themselves and by themselves.
So, that's exactly right. And when farmers, which is the primary producers, can add value to their products, whether it's packaging or processing, they can ignite a lot more income for themselves through the value addition of their products.
Yeah. And then through that, not only produce food, but then also income for their household.
Yes, and that's important, for them to produce food for their households so that they can be food secure, but also to gain some extra income to access more necessities that they might need.
Mm-hmm. Jan, let's talk a little bit about your work specifically with university students that you've learned through TagDev, because I think in there that is also a fantastic example on how we can work toward more secure food systems and resilient agricultural practices.
We must really make farming aspirational again. So a career, not a fallback. And that means that we should deliberately activate women, young people through jobs, finance, ownership, and visible role models. And through this TagDev 2 project with Ruforum, funded by the Mastercard Foundation, the explicit aim is for youth job creation in agriculture and turning university students into agripreneurs and employers rather than just the job seekers.
Mm-hmm. And an agripreneur, that's a beautiful concept. Just for our listeners, what is that, Jan? An agripreneur.
Yeah, I think an agripreneur is just an entrepreneur in the agriculture sector. So
Yeah,
using
fantastic.
agriculture products to sell, to
Yeah,
develop, to process,
yeah,
and be an entrepreneur with those products.
yeah, exactly. And so when you think about these university systems, where can we strengthen and what can we do better?
I think one of the biggest things is that it's often a hit and run situation. So we must stop funding 3-year cycles.
Mm-hmm.
So poverty was not built in 3 years and will not be resolved in 3 years. So
Mm-hmm.
what changes things in the long term and even generational commitment, these projects must be long term over bigger areas. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the second one is to get research out of the journal onto the farm. Too
Yeah.
much knowledge never reaches the farmers, and
Mm-hmm.
we need people and systems who can translate those research into practice to be physically being adaptable and applicable to the farming situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the third thing is um, that we should stop duplicating. So there's people and organizations working in silos. So every NGO, department, and funder, they tend to build their own structures, data and reporting, and the real leverage is to joining them up. So we
Yeah.
need to start to form partnerships and to work together. And I think the fourth thing that I am thinking of is also to hand over control.
Yeah.
So locally led means that communities must have the budget. They must have the control. They must make the decisions and not being consulted only. We must assist them and facilitate and mentor them, but there must be a buy-in. And I think the
Yeah.
communities must really lead that process from their side. They must be
Mm-hmm.
willing, they must buy into the process, into the system, into the model, and that's where you will find success.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things you mentioned there, Jan, many of it, all of it resonates so beautifully with me. But one thing that I've been thinking a lot about recently is that notion of an ecosystem. And that's what your mention of, or your guidance against duplicating is referencing. So we need to do better work of understanding who does what across our systems, across our ecosystem, and think through how and where we can collaborate and work together. Because, in my opinion, Jan, that is the only way that we will truly move the needle toward impactful change. That's not only sustainable, but is future proof. And so I'm so glad that you brought up that point, Jan. How about how does measurement show up in your work? The importance of measuring, monitoring, evaluating.
So we need to measure honestly. We
Mm-hmm.
can't improve what we cannot track.
Yeah.
They say to measure is to know,
Mm-hmm.
and that includes learning openly, also from what
Mm-hmm.
fails.
Yeah.
So we need to learn from our failures and to improve that. But to have the correct data, to collect all the data points and measure that honestly.
Yeah. That's great. Jan, in your opinion, reflecting on all the work that you do at the University of the Free State, all the real applied work that you do with smallholder farmers, with farmers within the supply chain, all the different actors within the commodity chain, and so on. How, in your opinion, will we achieve a world beyond poverty?
Honestly, not quickly and not through any single mechanism. But I think it is possible and it is
Mm-hmm.
achievable. But we tend, everywhere where I go, people start with in 2050 there will be so many billion people, and we need to produce more food to feed all these people. And I think that framing has become a cliche and it's incomplete because food security is not only about availability, it's about accessibility.
Yep.
So picture two people that side by side. One produces 10 times more food than they could ever need, and the other has no money to buy any. The second person is still food insecure. So the task is not only to grow more food, it's to also build economies in which people can earn and so they can afford and access the food. So poverty don't persist because the world lacks food. We already produce more than enough, but because of how income works, markets and access are distributed. So this is why I believe so strongly in stimulating local economies and in building value chains where none exist. The system change I keep coming back to is a world beyond poverty needs equitable food systems, climate just agriculture, inclusive finance, real investment in the next generation, and also the political will to make that structural change. So, my wish is plainly that people can be employed, that they can buy food and access that food, and then climb out of that poverty trap for good. A world without poverty is not a dream, it's a design challenge, and the communities we work with are already designing their way out.
Yep.
They just need the structures and the resources, bit of guidance, and the
Yep.
respect to do that. And
Yep.
then they will move out of that poverty trap for good.
Mm-hmm. So well stated, Jan. It's not about availability, it's about access. It's about building the systems that will enable equitable distribution of food and to invest in future generations. And that is just the wonderful work that you all are doing at the University of the Free State, but then also this collaboration with TagDev across the continent. So many people around the world who are not forced to live in a state of poverty can so often see poverty through a lens of hardship, limitation, and deprivation. And that is why conversations like this one with you, Jan, is just so important because they shed light on the full scope of the work being done and the people who are dedicating their lives to solve these problems. When applied researchers such as yourself bring to the work so much expertise, energy, and passion to make real widespread improvements, I cannot help but be filled with optimism about the progress that we will continue to make. Food security is such an immediate daily need, and so many other development issues such as health, education, employment, all of those cannot be solved until food security is established in a community. And the issue of food security and agriculture is so complex, regionally and culturally specific, and then also interconnected, like you've shared so beautifully, with industry, with finance, and then, of course, also with politics. And so it takes real experts to fully understand its complexity and then also to create truly effective solutions. And like you shared, such solutions are not simple one-off fixes, but they need to involve different players on different levels of the value chain, from the small-scale farmer all the way through to those who buy, and then also the people who eat and consume those products. Jan, thank you so very much for joining me today, and for shedding light on this crucial global issue. Thank you very much, Jan, for the work that you are doing. And thank you very, very much for nurturing the next generation of agripreneurs, right? Of farmers who will provide the food for us to eat, but to do it in a sustainable way and an effective way, and to future-proof the world for us in that regard. Jan, I cannot be more grateful, and I cannot be more honored to have you as a friend and a colleague in this work that we do to enable a world beyond poverty.
Thank you very much, Helene. That's a mouthful, and thank you so much. I think we're in a very privileged position to do what we do. If there's more people with the same vision, with the same heart for our communities, with our rural areas, with our farmers, I think the world can definitely be a better place, and we can definitely get out of this unemployment, food insecurity situation that we are currently in. So thank you for the opportunity. It was great talking to you, and let's build together and see how we can change the world one person at a time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jan.
Thank you, Helene. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Beyond Poverty podcast. To learn more about Dr. Swanepoel and his work, visit the University of the Free State website, or you can access information in the show notes. And please visit outreach-international.org, where you can learn more about our organization, gain insight about community-led development, and explore stories of projects and programs from our partner communities all around the world. Join us next time when we will continue the conversation as we all work together to build a world beyond poverty.